All right, we are just a wee bit up over 8 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get settled and see what we have ahead of us tonight. Welcome back. I do need to update the drink here because coffee is much too boring for what we have tonight. Honestly, it's not too much more exciting. Let's give that an ampersand, save a little bit of space. I didn't exactly give myself enough time to play bartender here. So, this is one of those days. I was capped on PTO, so obviously taking a random extra day for a mental health day, because it's a use it or lose it sort of situation. So what did I do with my newfound time off? I've been sitting at Starbucks for about 4 hours and reading before streaming reading. I'm a very exciting man, okay? So, yeah, mental day offs are great. I'm very bad about not using my PTO, so I force myself to take a 3-day weekend every other week or so, just to keep ahead of it. I think I accrue like 7 hours every 2 weeks, so use 8 of it, and eventually it will get down to a reasonable amount. I think right now, I usually hover around the 300-ish hour bank or so, and for the life of me, I don't know that I'm ever going to use it. It really should be. And I'm lucky to have a team and a boss that are super understanding. And honestly, my boss is just as bad as I am about not using his PTO, and will frequently just take an afternoon off because he's like, I'm capped, need to take some time off. So, I'm in a good place. And wish others could as well. Now, that's not to say the people that take, week or month-long vacations are not doing it the right way, because absolutely, if you can unplug and take that much time off and really just relax and recover, do it. Absolutely do it. But I don't really do vacations because I must make allotments for the fur kittens, the furry fuzzy ones. But so I'll take a random staycation from time to time. But yes, a good boss does make such a difference. It's amazing what being treated like a human being can do for your mental state. It's crazy. That shouldn't even be coming off as a joke. It's actually quite impressive. And I'm sure that all of us have seen the inverse. If we were going to have a conversation like this, I should have put a little bit more in this drink. See, that is why I'm glad. I'll not say whereabout, I think Zian knows, and Akimos may know, but I'm glad to not be in the private sector entirely. I'm in a weird little gray area that's a mix of both. So, and by not having to deal with the stock number must go up, ever upward, onward and upward, forever and eternity. Not having to have that be a priority, well, life is better for it. Alright, let's go ahead and see what we have. Not only the fun. Okay. Watch yourself. You're gonna get yourself banned from Subscribestar at this point. Alright, so let's go ahead and jump back into our reading and see what we have ahead of us tonight. Last time, you may remember, it's been a couple days, but you may remember that we have seen the great escape from the city of the Green Martians, the thrilling escapades and almost capture of Dejathoris and Sola. But John Carter did as all campy heroes of the time must do. Well, he had to stand back and do what he must to be the rear guard, and found himself captured, despite his heroic efforts. One man does not really readily hold off an army, even a man who can jump real good. So, let's go ahead and get back to our reading, because we left off on a fantastic cliffhanger last time. Let's actually look back a page. All was black and went down beneath them to oblivion. That was really one of the best possible places for us to end for the night. So, let's jump back. Oh, just get that one. All right, so we've got chapter 18 is where we'll resume tonight. So, let's dive back in. It must have been several hours before I regained consciousness, and I well remember the feeling of surprise which swept over me as I realized that I was not dead. I was lying among a pile of sleeping silks and furs in the corner of a small room, in which were several green warriors, and bending over me was an ancient and ugly female. As I opened my eyes, she turned to one of the warriors, saying, "You live, O Jed." "'Tis well," replied the one so addressed, rising and approaching my couch. "He should render rare sport for the great games." And now, as my eyes fell upon him, I saw that he was no Thark, for his ornaments and metal were not of that horde. He was a huge fellow, terribly scarred about the face and chest, and with one broken tusk and a missing ear. Strapped on either breast were human skulls, and depending from these a number of dried human hands. A reminder that the author treats all, or it refers to all sentient life as human, which is remarkably forward-thinking of him. You know what? I'll take it. Early 1900s, rock on. But just a reminder, not necessarily human as we might conceive them are these skulls and hands. His reference to the great games of which I had heard so much while among the Tharks convinced me that I had but jumped from purgatory into Gehenna. After a few more words with the female, during which she assured him that I was now fully fit to travel, the Jed ordered that we mount and ride after the main column. Okay, well, as soon as I praised the author, I'm still getting the icky from him using female interchangeably with women. That's a modern icky squicky, I guess, but I can't really separate myself from that one. I was strapped securely to as wild and unmanageable a thoat as I had ever seen, and with a mounted warrior on either side to prevent the beast from bolting, we rode forth at a furious pace in pursuit of the column. My wounds gave me but little pain. So wonderfully and rapidly had the applications and injections of the female exercised their therapeutic powers, and so deftly had she bound and plastered the injuries. Just before dark, we reached the main body of troops, shortly after they had made camp for the night. I was immediately taken before the leader, who proved to be the Jeddak of the hordes of Warhum. Like the Jed who had brought me, he was frightfully scarred, and also decorated with the breastplate of human skulls and dried dead hands. which seemed to mark all the greater warriors among the Warhoons, as well as to indicate their awful ferocity, which greatly transcends even that of the Tharks. Exactly. Using an adjective as a noun rarely goes well, and has a diminutive tone to it when applied as such. And we don't like diminutives around here. Isn't that right, Timbo? Yes. The Jeddak, Bar Comus, was comparatively young, was the object of the fierce and jealous hatred of his old lieutenant, Dak Kova, the Jed who had captured me, and I could not but note the almost studied efforts which the latter made to affront his superior. He entirely omitted the usual formal salutation as we entered the presence of the Jeddak, and as he pushed me roughly before the ruler, he exclaimed in a loud and menacing voice, "I have brought a strange creature wearing the metal of a Thark, whom it is my pleasure to have battle with a wild throat at the great games." "You will die as Bar Comus, your Jeddak, sees fit, if at all," replied the young ruler, with emphasis and dignity. "If at all," roared Dak Kova, "by the dead hands at my throat, but he shall die! Bar Comus, no maudlin weakness on your part shall save him. Oh, would that Warhoon were ruled by a real Jeddak, rather than by a water-hearted weakling from whom even old Dak Kova could tear the metal with his bare hands." Bar Comus eyed the defiant and insubordinate chieftain for an instant. His expression, one of haughty, fearless contempt and hate. And then, without drawing a weapon, and without uttering a word, he hurled himself at the throat of his defamer. I never before had seen two green Martian warriors battle with nature's weapons, and the exhibition of animal ferocity which ensued was as fearful a thing as the most disordered imagination could picture. They tore at each other's eyes and ears with their hands, and with their gleaming tusks repeatedly slashed and gored, until both were cut fairly to ribbons from head to foot. Bar Comus had much the better of the battle, as he was stronger, quicker, and more intelligent. It soon seemed that the encounter was done, saving only the final death thrust, when Bar Comus slipped in, breaking away from a clinch. It was the one little opening that Dak Kova needed, and hurling himself at the body of his adversary, he buried his single mighty tusk in Bar Comus's groin, and with a last powerful effort, gripped the young Jeddak wide open the full length of his body, the great tusk finally wedging in the bones of Bar Comus's jaw. Victor and vanquished rolled limp and lifeless upon the moss, a huge mass of torn and bloody flesh. Bar Comus was stone dead, and only the most Herculean efforts on the part of Dak Kova's females saved him from the fate he deserved. 3 days later, he walked without assistance to the body of Bar Comus, which, by custom, had not been moved from where it fell, and placing his foot upon the neck of his erstwhile ruler, he assumed the title of Jeddak of Warhoon. The dead Jeddak's hands and head were removed, to be added to the ornaments of his conqueror, and then his women cremated what remained, amid wild and terrible laughter. The injuries of Dak Kova had delayed the march so greatly that it was decided to give up the expedition, which was a raid upon a small Thark community, in retaliation for the destruction of the incubator, until after the Great Games, and the entire body of warriors, 10,000 in number, turned back toward Warhoon. My introduction to these cruel and bloodthirsty people was but an index to the scenes I witnessed almost daily with them. They are a smaller horde than the Tharks, but much more ferocious. Not a day passed but that some members of the various Warhoon communities met in deadly combat, I have seen as high as 8 mortal duels within a single day. We reached the city of Warhoon after some 3 days' march, and I was immediately cast into a dungeon and heavily chained to the floor and walls. Food was brought me at intervals, but owing to the utter darkness of the place, I do not know whether I lay there days or weeks or months. It was the most horrible experience of all my life. And that my mind did not give way to the terrors of that inky blackness has been a wonder to me ever since. The place was filled with creeping, crawling things. Cold, sinuous bodies passed over me when I lay down, and in the darkness I occasionally caught glimpses of gleaming, fiery eyes fixed in a horrible intentness upon me. No sound reached me from the world above, and no word would my jailer vouchsafe when my food was brought to me, although I at first bombarded him with questions. Finally, all the hatred and maniacal loathing for these awful creatures who had placed me in this horrible place was centered, by my tottering reason, upon this single emissary, who represented to me the entire horde of Warhoons. I had noticed that he always advanced with his dim torch to where he could place the food within my reach, and as he stooped to place it upon the floor, his head was about on a level with my breast. So, with the cunning of a madman, I backed into the far corner of my cell, when next I heard him approaching, and gathering a little slack of the great chain which held me in my hand, I waited his coming, crouching like some beast of prey. As he stooped to place my food upon the ground, I swung the chain above my head and crashed the links with all my strength upon his skull. Without a sound, he slipped to the floor, stone dead. Laughing and chattering like the idiot I was fast becoming, I fell upon his prostrate form, my fingers feeling for his dead throat. Presently, they came in contact with a small chain, at the end of which dangled a number of keys. The touch of my fingers on these keys brought back my reason with the suddenness of thought. No longer was I a gibbering idiot, but a sane, reasoning man, with the means of escape within my very hands. As I was groping to remove the chain from about my victim's neck, I glanced up into the darkness to see 6 pairs of gleaming eyes fixed, unwinking upon me. Slowly, they approached, and slowly I shrank back from the awful horror of them. Back into my corner I crouched, holding my hands palms out before me, and stealthily on came the awful eyes, until they reached the dead body at my feet. Then, slowly they retreated, but this time with a strange, grating sound, and finally they disappeared in some black and distant recess of my dungeon. Simba, I am trying to read, buddy. Please don't stand in front of the keyboard. Yes. Squeak. There we go. There we go. Yes. Obstructing is a good way to put it. Limiting how far we get in the book tonight. Small price to pay. Yes. Alright, so continuing on with chapter 19. Slowly, I regained my composure, and finally essayed again to attempt to remove the keys from the dead body of my former jailer. But as I reached out into the darkness to locate it, I found to my horror that it was gone. Then the truth flashed on me. The owners of those gleaming eyes had dragged my prize away from me to be devoured in their neighboring lair. As they had been waiting for days, for weeks, for months, through all this awful eternity of my imprisonment to drag my dead carcass to their feast. For 2 days, no food was brought me, but then a new messenger appeared, and my incarceration went on as before. But not again did I allow my reason to be submerged by the horror of my position. Shortly after this episode, another prisoner was brought in and chained near me. By the dim torchlight, I saw that he was a red Martian, and I could scarcely await the departure of his guards to address him. As their retreating footsteps died away in the distance, I called out softly the Martian word of greeting, "Coward." "Who are you who speaks out of the darkness?" he answered. "John Carter, a friend of the Red Men of Helium." "I'm of Helium," he said, "but I do not recall your name." And then I told him my story, as I have written it here, omitting only any reference to my love for Dejah Thoris. He was much excited by the news of Helium's princess, and seemed quite positive that she and Sola could easily have reached a point of safety from where they left me. He said that he knew the place well, because the defile through which the Warhoon warriors had passed when they discovered us was the only one ever used by them when marching to the south. Dejah Thoris and Sola entered the hills not 5 miles from a great waterway, and are now probably quite safe, he assured me. My fellow prisoner was Kantos Kan, a Padwar, lieutenant, in the navy of Helium. He had been a member of the ill-fated expedition which had fallen into the hands of the Tharks at the time of Dejah Thoris' capture. And he briefly related the events which followed the defeat of the battleships. Badly injured and only partially manned, they had limped slowly toward Helium, but while passing near the city of Zdonga, the capital of Helium's hereditary enemies among the Red Men of Barsoom, they had been attacked by a great body of war vessels, and all but the craft to which Kantos Kan belonged were either destroyed or captured. His vessel was chased for days by 3 of the Zdongan warships, but finally escaped during the darkness of a moonless night. 30 days after the capture of Dejah Thoris, or about the time of our coming to Thark, his vessel had reached Helium with about 10 survivors of the original crew of 700 officers and men. Immediately, 7 great fleets, each of 100 mighty warships, had been dispatched to search for Dejah Thoris, and from these vessels 2,000 smaller craft had been kept out continuously in futile search for the missing princess. 2 green Martian communities had been wiped off the face of Barsoom by the avenging fleet, but no trace of Dejah Thoris had been found. They had been searching among the northern hordes, and only within the past few days had they extended their quest to the south. Kantos Kan had been detailed to one of the small one-man flyers, and had had the misfortune to be discovered by the Warhoons while exploring their city. The bravery and daring of the man who won my greatest respect and admiration. Alone, he had landed at the city's boundary, and on foot had penetrated the buildings surrounding the plaza. 2 days and nights he had explored their quarters and their dungeons in search of his beloved princess, only to fall into the hands of a party of Warhoons as he was about to leave. After assuring himself that Dejah Thoris was not a captive there. During the period of our incarceration, Kantos Kan and I became well acquainted, and formed a warm personal friendship. A few days only elapsed, however, before we were dragged forth from our dungeon for the great games. We were conducted early one morning to an enormous amphitheater, which, instead of having been built upon the surface of the ground, was excavated below the surface. It had partially filled with debris, so that how large it had originally been was difficult to say. In its present condition, it held the entire 20,000 Warhoons of the assembled hordes. The arena was immense, but extremely uneven and unkempt. Around it, the Warhoons had piled building stone from some of the ruined edifices of the ancient city to prevent the animals and the captives from escaping into the audience. And at each end had been constructed cages to hold them until their turns came to meet some horrible death upon the arena. Cantos Cat and I were confined together in one of the cages. In the others were wild calots, thoats, mad zititars, green warriors, and women of other hordes, and many strange and ferocious wild beasts of Barsoom, which I had never before seen. The din of their roaring, growling, and squealing was deafening, and the formidable appearance of any one of them was enough to make the stoutest heart feel grave forebodings. Cantos Can explained to me that at the end of the day, one of these prisoners would gain freedom, and the others would lie dead about the arena. The winners in the various contests of the day would be pitted against each other, until only two remained alive, the victor in the last encounter being set free, whether animal or man. The following morning, the cages would be filled with a new consignment of victims, and so on, throughout the 10 days of the games. Shortly after we had been caged, the amphitheater began to fill, and within an hour every available part of the seating space was occupied. Dak Kova, with his jeds and chieftains, sat at the center of one side of the arena upon a large raised platform. At a signal from Dak Kova, the doors of 2 cages were thrown open, and a dozen green Martian females were driven to the center of the arena. Each was given a dagger, and then, at the far end, a pack of 12 calots, or wild dogs, were loosed upon them. As the brutes, growling and foaming, rushed upon the almost defenseless women, I turned my head that I might not see the horrid sight. The yells and laughter of the green horde bore witness to the excellent quality of the sport, and when I turned back to the arena, as Cantos Can told me, it was over. I saw 3 victorious calots snarling and growling over the bodies of their prey. The women had given a good account of themselves. Next, a mad zititar was loosed among the remaining dogs, and so it went throughout the long, hot, horrible day. During the day, I was pitted against first men and then beasts, but as I was armed with a longsword and always outclassed my adversary in agility and generally in strength as well, it proved but child's play to me. Time and time again I won the applause of the bloodthirsty multitude, and toward the end there were cries that I be taken from the arena and be made a member of the hordes of Warhoon. Finally, there were but 3 of us left: a great green warrior of some far northern horde, Cantos Can, and myself. The other 2 were to battle, and then I to fight the conqueror for the liberty which was accorded the final winner. Cantos Can had fought several times during the day, and like myself had always proven victorious, but occasionally, by the smallest of margins, especially when pitted against the green warriors, I had little hope that he could best his giant adversary who had mowed down all before him during the day. The fellow towered nearly 16 feet in height, while Cantos Can was some inches under 6 feet. As they advanced to meet one another, I saw for the first time a trick of Martian swordsmanship, which centered on Cantos Can's every hope of victory in life on one cast of the dice. For, as he came to within about 20 feet of the huge fellow, he threw his sword arm far behind him over his shoulder, and with a mighty sweep hurled his weapon point foremost at the green warrior. It flew true as an arrow, and piercing the poor devil's heart, laid him dead upon the arena. Cantos Can and I were now pitted against each other, but as we approached the encounter, I whispered to him to prolong the battle until nearly dark, in the hope that we might find some means of escape. The horde evidently guessed that we had no hearts to fight each other, and so they howled in rage as neither of us placed a fatal thrust. Just as I saw the sudden coming of dark, I whispered to Cantos Can to thrust his sword between my left arm and my body. As he did so, I staggered back, clasping the sword tightly with my arm, and thus fell to the ground with his weapon apparently protruding from my chest. The oldest trick in the book that Cantos Can perceived my coup, and, stepping quickly to my side, he placed his foot upon my neck, and withdrawing his sword from my body, gave me the final death blow through the neck, which is supposed to sever the jugular vein. But in this instance, the cold blade slipped harmlessly into the sand of the arena. In the darkness which had now fallen, none could tell but that it had really finished me. I whispered to him to go and claim his freedom, and then look for me in the hills east of the city. And so he left me. When the amphitheater had cleared, I crept stealthily to the top, and, as the great excavation lay far from the plaza, and in an untenanted portion of the great dead city, I had little trouble in reaching the hills beyond. Are you not entertained? All right, Chapter 20. We'll continue on from Martian Gladiator into whatever's next. In the Atmosphere Factory. For 2 days I waited there for Cantos Can, but as he did not come, I started off on foot in a northwesterly direction, toward a point where he had told me lay the nearest waterway. My only food consisted of vegetable milk from the plants which gave so bounteously of this priceless fluid. Through 2 long weeks I wandered, stumbling through the nights, guided only by the stars, and hiding during the days behind some protruding rock or among the occasional hills I traversed. Several times I was attacked by wild beasts, strange, uncouth monstrosities that leaped upon me in the dark, so that I had ever to grasp my long sword in my hand, that I might be ready for them. Usually, my strange, newly acquired telepathic power warned me in ample time, but once I was down with vicious fangs at my jugular, and a hairy face pressed close to mine before I knew that I was even threatened. What manner of thing was upon me I did not know, but that it was large and heavy and many-legged, I could feel. My hands were at its throat before the fangs had a chance to bury themselves in my neck, and slowly I forced the hairy face from me and closed my fingers vice-like upon its windpipe. Without sound, we lay there, the beast exerting every effort to reach me with those awful fangs, and I straining to maintain my grip and choke the life from it as I kept it from my throat. Slowly, my arms gave to the unequal struggle, and inch by inch, the burning eyes and gleaming tusks of my antagonist crept toward me, until, as the hairy face touched mine again, I realized that all was over. And then, a living mass of destruction sprang from the surrounding darkness, fell upon the creature, and that held me pinioned to the ground. The two rolled, growling upon the moss, tearing and rending one another in a frightful manner. But it was soon over, and my preserver stood with lowered head above the throat of the dead thing which would have killed me. The nearer moon, hurtling suddenly above the horizon and lighting up the Barsoomian scene, showed me that my preserver was Woola. But from whence he had come, or how found me, I was at a loss to know. That I was glad of his companionship it is needless to say, but my pleasure at seeing him was tempered by anxiety as to the reason of his leaving Deja Thoris. Only her death, I felt sure, could account for his absence from her, so faithful I knew him to be to my commands. By the light of the now brilliant moons, I saw that he was but a shadow of his former self, and he turned from my caress and commenced greedily to devour the dead carcass at my feet. I realized that the poor fellow was more than half starved. I myself was in but little better plight, but I could not bring myself to eat the uncooked flesh. I had no means of making a fire. When Woola had finished his meal, I again took up my wary and seemingly endless wandering in quest of the elusive waterway. At daybreak of the 15th day of my search, I was overjoyed to see the high trees that denoted the object of my search. About noon, I dragged myself warily to the portals of a huge building which covered perhaps 4 square miles and towered 200 feet in the air. It showed no aperture in the mighty walls other than the tiny door at which I sank exhausted, nor was there any sign of life about it. I could find no bell or other method of making my presence known to the inmates of the place, unless a small round hole in the wall near the door was for that purpose. It was of about the bigness of a lead pencil, and thinking that it might be in the nature of a speaking tube, I put my mouth to it, and was about to call into it when a voice issued from it, asking me whom I might be, where from, and the nature of my errand. I explained that I had escaped from the war hoons, and was dying of starvation and exhaustion. "You wear the metal of a green warrior, and are followed by a coward. Yet you are of the figure of a red man. In color you are neither green nor red. In the name of the ninth ray, what manner of creature are you?" "I am a friend of the red men of Barsoom, and I am starving. In the name of humanity, open to us," I replied. Presently, the door commenced to recede before me, until it had sunk into the wall 50 feet. Then it stopped, and slid easily to the left, exposing a short, narrow corridor of concrete, at the further end of which was another door, similar in every respect to the one I had just passed. No one was in sight, yet immediately we passed the first door, it slid gently into place behind us, and receded rapidly to its original position in the front wall of the building. As the door had slipped aside, I had noted its great thickness, fully 20 feet, and as it reached its place once more after closing behind us, great cylinders of steel had dropped from the ceiling behind it and fitted their lower ends into apertures countersunk in the floor. A second and third door receded before me, and slipped to one side as the first, before I reached a large inner chamber, where I found food and drink set out upon a great stone table. A voice directed me to satisfy my hunger and to feed my camel, and while I was thus engaged, my invisible host put me through a severe and searching cross-examination. Hang on. Sim's being a pain in the ass. Alright, sorry about that. Little man has discovered new and interesting ways to annoy me. Namely, to mess around with the entertainment center and muck around with the cables that go into my modem. So, if we care to stay online, I do need to interrupt his fun. Alright. "Your statements are most remarkable," said the voice, on concluding its questioning. "But you are evidently speaking the truth, and it is equally evident that you are not of Barsoom. I can tell that by the conformation of your brain and the strange location of your internal organs. and the size and shape of your heart." "Can you see through me?" I exclaimed. "Yes, I can see all but your thoughts. And were you a Barsoomian, I could read those." Then a door opened at the far side of the chamber, and a strange, dried-up little mummy of a man came toward me. He wore but a single article of clothing, or adornment, a small collar of gold, from which depended upon his chest a great ornament as large as a dinner plate, set solid with huge diamonds. Except for the exact center, which was occupied by a strange stone, an inch in diameter, that scintillated 9 different and distinct rays. The 7 colors of our earthly prism, and 2 beautiful rays which, to me, were new and nameless. I cannot describe them any more than you could describe red to a blind man. I only know that they were beautiful in the extreme. So, coming to Mars, he's discovered a new superpower, seeing a broader spectrum, I guess. Okay, sure. The old man sat and talked with me for hours. And the strangest part of our intercourse was that I could read his every thought, while he could not fathom an iota from my mind unless I spoke. I did not apprise him of my ability to sense his mental operations, and thus I learned a great deal which proved of immense value to me later, and which I would never have known had he suspected my strange power. For the Martians, which have such perfect control of their mental machinery, that they are able to direct their thoughts with absolute precision. The building in which I found myself contained the machinery which produces that artificial atmosphere which sustains life on Mars. The secret of the entire process hinges on the use of the 9th ray, one of the beautiful scintillations which I had noted emanating from the great stone in my host's diadem. This ray is separated from the other rays of the sun by means of finely adjusted instruments placed upon the roof of the huge building, 3/4 of which is used for reservoirs in which the 9th ray is stored. This product is then treated electrically, or rather certain proportions of refined electric vibrations are incorporated with it, and the result is then pumped to the 5 principal air centers of the planet, where, as it is released, contact with the ether of space transforms it into atmosphere. I love the speculative science that comes into this. I like to imagine, like, if you, well, I know Akamos has when we did it ourselves, but if you've read anything of Crichton, you get the very firm belief that he's trying to make his science fiction like a firm science as he's going through. This has the same feel of trying to be a firm science from a position of not knowing anything about science. Crichton is great. The world was much the worse when he passed. When we did our first birthday marathon reading, well, at first, hopefully first, means we'll be doing more, we got through all of the Andromeda Strain in one session. It was pretty crazy, actually. I do need to do a rebroadcast of that sometime. I totally forgot about that, actually, because I have the recording, but maybe a day to fill a week or something. We'll see. Where were we? There is always sufficient reserve of the 9th ray stored in the great building to maintain the present Martian atmosphere for 1,000 years. And the only fear, as my new friend told me, was that some accident might befall the pumping apparatus. He led me to an inner chamber, where I beheld a battery of 20 radium pumps, any one of which was equal to the task of furnishing all Mars with the atmosphere compound. For 800 years, he told me, he had watched these pumps, which are used alternately, a day each at a stretch. or a little over 24 and 1/2 Earth hours. He has one assistant who divides the watch with him. Half a Martian year, about 344 of our days, each of these men spend alone in this huge, isolated plant. Every red Martian is taught during earliest childhood the principles of the manufacture of atmosphere, but only 2 at one time ever hold the secret of ingress to the great building, which, built as it is with walls 150 feet thick, is absolutely unassailable, even the roof being guarded from assault by aircraft by a glass covering 5 feet thick. The only fear they entertain of attack is from the green Martians, or some demented red man, as all Barsoomians realize that the very existence of every form of life of Mars is dependent upon the uninterrupted working of this plant. Simba, what? The man's just yelling from across the other room. One curious fact I discovered as I watched his thoughts was that the outer doors are manipulated by telepathic means. The locks are so finely adjusted that the doors are released by the action of a certain combination of thought waves. To experiment with my newfound toy, I thought to surprise him into revealing this combination, and so I asked him in a casual manner how he had managed to unlock the massive doors for me from the inner chambers of the building. As quick as a flash, there leaped to his mind 9 Martian sounds, but as quickly faded as he answered that this was a secret he must not divulge. From then on, his manner toward me changed, as though he feared that he had been surprised into divulging his great secret, and I read suspicion and fear in his looks and thoughts, though his words were still fair. Before I retired for the night, he promised to give me a letter to a nearby agricultural officer who would help me on my way to Zodanga, which he said was the nearest Martian city. But be sure that you do not let them know you are bound for helium, as they are at war with that country. My assistant and I are of no country. We belong to all Barsoom, and this talisman, which we wear, protects us in all lands, even among the green men, though we do not trust ourselves in their hands if we can avoid it, he added. And so, good night, my friend, he continued. May you have a long and restful sleeping. Yes, a long sleep. And though he smiled pleasantly, I saw in his thoughts the wish that he had never admitted me. And then a picture of him standing over me in the night, and the swift thrust of a long dagger in the half-formed words, I am sorry, but it is for the best of Barsoom. As he closed the door of my chamber, behind him, his thoughts were cut off from me, as was the sight of him, which seemed strange to me in my little knowledge of thought transference. What was I to do? How could I escape through these mighty walls? Easily could I kill him, now that I was warned. But once he was dead, I could no more escape. And with the stopping of the machinery of the great plant, I should die with all the other inhabitants of the planet. All. Even Deja Thoris, were she not already dead. For the others, I did not give the snap of my finger. But the thought of Deja Thoris drove from my mind all desire to kill my mistaken host. Cautiously, I opened the door of my apartment, and, followed by Woola, sought the inner of the great doors. A wild scheme had come to me. I would attempt to force the great locks by the 9 thought waves I had read in my host's mind. Creeping stealthily through the corridor after corridor, and down winding runways which turned hither and thither, I finally reached the great hall in which I had broken my long fast that morning. Had to run off and harass a cat again. Lordy. Yeah. Little man's ornery tonight. Nowhere had I seen my host, nor did I know where he kept himself by night. I was on the point of stepping boldly out into the room when a slight noise behind me warned me back into the shadows of a recess in the corridor. Dragging Woola after me, I crouched low in the darkness. Presently, the old man passed close by me, and as he entered the dimly lighted chamber which I had been about to pass through, I saw that he held a long, thin dagger in his hand, and that he was sharpening it upon a stone. In his mind was the decision to inspect the radium pumps, which would take about 30 minutes, and then return to my bedchamber and finish me. As he passed through the great hall and disappeared down the runway which led to the pump room, I stole stealthily away from my hiding place and crossed to the great door, the inner of the three which stood between me and liberty. Concentrating my mind upon the massive lock, I hurled the 9 thought waves against it. In breathless expectancy, I waited, when, finally, the great door moved softly toward me and slid quietly to one side. One after the other, the remaining mighty portals opened at my command, and Woola and I stepped forth into the darkness, free, but little better off than we had been before, other than that we had full stomachs. Hastening away from the shadows of the formidable pile, I made for the first crossroad, intending to strike the central turnpike as quickly as possible. This I reached about morning, and entering the first enclosure I searched for some evidences of a habitation. There were low, rambling buildings of concrete, barred with heavy, impassable doors, and no amount of hammering and hallooing brought any response. Weary and exhausted from sleeplessness, I threw myself upon the ground, commanding Woola to stand guard. Some time later, I was awakened by his frightful growlings, and opened my eyes to see 3 red Martians standing a short distance from us, covering me with their rifles. I am unarmed, and no enemy, I hasten to explain. I have been a prisoner among the green men, and am on my way to Zodanga. All I ask is food and rest for myself and my Kala, and the proper directions for reaching my destination. They lowered their rifles and advanced pleasantly toward me, placing their right hands upon my left shoulder, after the manner of their custom of salute, and asking me many questions about myself and my wanderings. They then took me to the house of one of them, which was only a short distance away. The buildings I had been hammering at in the early morning were occupied only by stock and farm produce. The house proper, standing among a grove of enormous trees, and like all red Martian homes, had been raised at night some 40 or 50 feet from the ground, on a large round metal shaft, which slid up or down within a sleeve sunk in the ground, and was operated by a tiny radium engine in the entrance hall of the building. Instead of bothering with bolts and bars for their dwellings, the red Martians simply run them up out of harm's way during the night. They also have private means for lowering or raising them from the ground without, if they wish to go away and leave them. These brothers, with their wives and children, occupied 3 similar houses on this farm. They did no work themselves, being government officers in charge. The labor was performed by convicts, prisoners of war, delinquent debtors, and confirmed bachelors, who were too poor to pay the high celibate tax, which all red Martian governments impose. Excuse me, what? They were the personification of cordiality and hospitality, and I spent several days with them, resting and recuperating from my long, arduous experiences. When they heard my story, I omitted all reference to Deja Thoris and the old man of the atmosphere plant. They advised me to color my body to more nearly resemble their own race, and then attempt to find employment in Zidanga, either in the army or in the navy. The chances are small that your tale will be believed until after you have proven your trustworthiness and won friends among the higher nobles of the court. This you can most easily do through military service, as we are a warlike people on Barsoom, explained one of them, and save our richest favors for the fighting men. When I was ready to depart, they furnished me with a small domestic bull thoat, such as is used for saddle purposes by all red Martians. The animal is about the size of a horse and quite gentle, but in color and shape, an exact replica of his huge and fierce cousin of the wilds. The brothers had supplied me with a reddish oil, with which I anointed my entire body, and one of them cut my hair, which had grown quite long, in the prevailing fashion of the time, square at the back and banged in front, so that I could have passed anywhere upon Barsoom as a full-fledged red Martian. My medal and ornaments were also renewed in the style of a Zidangan gentleman, attached to the House of Tor, which was the family name of my benefactors. They filled a little sack at my side with Zidangan money. The medium of exchange upon Mars is not dissimilar from our own, except that the coins are oval. Paper money is issued by individuals as they require it, and redeemed twice yearly. If a man issues more than he can redeem, the government pays his creditors in full, and the debtor works out the amount upon the farms, or in mines, which are all owned by the government. This suits everybody except the debtor, as it has been a difficult thing to obtain sufficient voluntary labor to work the great isolated farmlands of Mars, stretching as they do like narrow ribbons from pole to pole, through wide stretches peopled by wild animals and wilder men. When I mentioned my inability to repay them for their kindness to me, they assured me that I would have ample opportunity if I lived long upon Barsoom, and bidding me farewell, they watched me until I was out of sight upon the broad, white turnpike. Well, he managed to find some rather good-hearted government overseer farmers to make sure that he's well taken care of and sorted out, and ready to be a productive member of society. But let us take a moment to think back on who is manning the farms, particularly of note the quote-unquote confirmed bachelors, which, as you may or may not be aware, in the early 1900s, confirmed bachelor was more or less a euphemism for a gay man. So, yeah, that's a thing. Product of the times, but that's a thing. All right, that brings us to the end of chapter 20, and we have before us a decent-sized chapter, and we are at about the hour mark. So let's go ahead and take a short break. I will give Simba some attention so that he will stop harassing me during our reading time, and we will be back in just a few minutes. Stretch your legs, top up your drinks, give some attention to your own fuzzy friends, and we'll be back in just a little while. Thanks. All right, we are back. Welcome back, welcome back. So, we've seen a little bit more wandering and adventure tonight. We've seen John Carter's capture at the hands of the Warsum, and his escape after a cunning bit of gladiatorial combat and trickery. The oldest trick in the book. Stab me by the arm and I will hold your sword down. Oh no, you have killed me. Oh no. Yeah. It's amazing that worked. They're not too big on subterfuge on Mars, apparently. I think it's been established that no one lies on Mars, except for John Carter. So, I guess some rather subtle acting, or not so subtle as the case may be, will be surprisingly efficient. I guess. So, let's go ahead and see, now that John has found his way toward civilization, as he's found some farm overseers that have been so kind as to say, you should probably dye yourself red to look more like us, and then maybe get a job with the army. Yes, conformity and military service. Very early 1900s, yes indeed, actually. Alright, so, Chapter 21. An Air Scout for Sadonga. As I proceeded on my journey toward Sadonga, many strange and interesting sights arrested my attention. And at the several farmhouses where I stopped, I learned a number of new and instructive things concerning the methods and manners of Barsoom. The water which supplies the farms of Mars is collected in immense underground reservoirs at either pole from the melting ice caps, and pumped through long conduits to the various populated centers. Along either side of these conduits, and extending their entire length, lie the cultivated districts. These are divided into tracts of about the same size, each tract being under the supervision of one or more government officers. Instead of flooding the surface of the fields and thus wasting immense quantities of water by evaporation, the precious liquid is carried underground through a vast network of small pipes directly to the roots of the vegetation. The crops upon Mars are always uniform, for there are no droughts, no rains, no high winds, and no insects or destroying birds. On this trip, I tasted the first meat I had eaten since leaving Earth. Large, juicy steaks and chops from the well-fed domestic animals of the farms. Also, I enjoyed luscious fruits and vegetables, but not a single article of food which was exactly similar to anything on Earth. Every plant and flower and vegetable and animal has been so refined by ages of careful, scientific cultivation and breeding that the likes of them on Earth dwindled into pale, gray, characterless nothingness by comparison. At a second stop, I met some highly cultivated people of the noble class, and while in conversation we chanced to speak of helium. One of the older men had been there on a diplomatic mission several years before, and spoke with regret of the conditions which seemed destined ever to keep these two countries at war. Helium, he said, rightly boasts the most beautiful women of Barsoom, and of all her treasures, the wondrous daughter of Mars Kajak, Deja Thoris, is the most exquisite flower. Why, he added, the people really worship the ground she walks upon, and since her loss on that ill-starred expedition, all Helium has been draped in mourning. That our ruler should have attacked the disabled fleet as it was returning to Helium was but another of his awful blunders which I fear will sooner or later compel Sadonga to elevate a wiser man to his place. Even now, though our victorious armies are surrounding Helium, the people of Sadonga are voicing their displeasure. for the war is not a popular one, since it is not based on right or justice. Our forces took advantage of the absence of the principal fleet of Helium on their search for the princess, and so we have been easily able to reduce the city to a sorry plight. It is said she will fall within the next few passages of the further moon. And what, think you, may have been the fate of the princess, Deja Thoris? I asked as casually as possible. She is dead, he answered. This much was learned from a green warrior recently captured by our forces in the south. She escaped from the hordes of Thark with a strange creature of another world, only to fall into the hands of the Warhoons. Their throats were found wandering upon the sea bottom, and evidences of a bloody conflict were discovered nearby. While this information was in no way reassuring, neither was it at all conclusive proof of the death of Deja Thoris. And so I determined to make every effort possible to reach Helium as quickly as I could, and carry to Taros Mors such news of his granddaughter's possible whereabouts as lay in my power. 3 days after leaving the three Tor brothers, I arrived at Zidonga. From the moment that I had come in contact with the red inhabitants of Mars, I had noticed that Woola drew a great amount of unwelcome attention to me. Since the huge brute belonged to a species which is never domesticated by the red men. Were one to stroll down Broadway with with a Numidian lion at his heels, the effect would be somewhat similar to that which I should have produced had I entered Zidonga with Woola. The very thought of parting with the faithful fellow caused me so great regret and genuine sorrow that I put it off until just before we arrived at the city's gates. But then, finally, it became imperative that we separate. Had nothing further than my own safety or pleasure been at stake, no argument could have prevailed upon me to turn away the one creature upon Barsoom that had never failed in a demonstration of affection and loyalty. But as I would willingly have offered my life in the service of her in search of whom I was about to challenge the unknown dangers of this, to me, mysterious city, I could not permit even Woola's life to threaten the success of my venture, much less his momentary happiness, for I doubted not he soon would forget me. And so I bade the poor beast an affectionate farewell, promising him, however, that if I came through my adventure in safety, that in some way I should find the means to search him out. He seemed to understand me fully, and when I pointed back in the direction of Thark, he turned sorrowfully away. Nor could I bear to watch him go, but resolutely set my face towards Zidonga, with a touch of heartsickness, approached her frowning walls. The letter I bore from them gained me immediate entrance to the vast walled city. It was still very early in the morning, and the streets were practically deserted. The residences, raised high upon their metal columns, resembled huge rookeries, while the uprights themselves presented the appearance of steel tree trunks. The shops, as a rule, were not raised from the ground, nor were their doors bolted or barred, since thievery is practically unknown upon Barsoom. Assassination is the ever-present fear of all Barsoomians, and for this reason alone, their homes are raised high above the ground at night, or in times of danger. The Tor brothers had given me explicit directions for reaching the point of the city where I could find living accommodations and be near the offices of the government agents, to whom they had given me letters. My way led to the central square or plaza, which is a characteristic of all Martian cities. The plaza of Zidonga covers a square mile and is bounded by the palaces of the Jeddak, the Jeds, and other members of the royalty and nobility of Zidonga, as well as by the principal public buildings, cafes, and shops. As I was crossing the great square, lost in wonder and admiration of the magnificent architecture and the gorgeous scarlet vegetation which carpeted the broad lawns, I discovered a red Martian walking briskly toward me from one of the avenues. He paid not the slightest attention to me, but as he came abreast, I recognized him, and turning, I placed my hand upon his shoulder, calling out, "Coward! Kantos Khan!" Like lightning, he wheeled, and before I could so much as lower my hand, the point of his long sword was at my breast. Who are you? He growled. And then, as a backward leap carried me 50 feet from his sword, he dropped the point to the ground and exclaimed, laughing, I do not need a better reply. There's but one man upon all Barsoom who can bounce about like a rubber ball. By the mother of the further moon, John Carter, how came you here? And have you become a Darseen that you can change your color at will? You gave me a bad half-minute, my friend, he continued, after I had briefly outlined my adventures since parting with him in the arena at Warhoon. Were my name and city known to the Zidongans, I would shortly be sitting on the banks of the lost sea of Chorus with my revered and departed ancestors. I am here in the interest of Cardos Mors, Jadak of Helium, to discover the whereabouts of Deja Thoris, our princess. Sab Than, Prince of Zidonga, has her hidden in the city, and has fallen madly in love with her. His father, Than Kosis, Jadak of Zidonga, has made her voluntary marriage to his son the price of peace between our countries. But Tardos Mors will not accede to the demands, and has sent word that he and his people would rather look upon the dead face of their princess than see her wed to any man than her own choice. And that, personally, he would prefer being engulfed in the ashes of a lost and burning helium to joining the metal of his house with that of Thancosis. His reply was the deadliest front he could put upon Thancosis and the Zidongans, but his people love him the more for it, and his strength in helium is greater today than ever. Yeah, of course, indeed. Like, yeah, that's about right. That's just about right. I have been here 3 days, continued Kantos Khan, but I have not yet found where Deja Thoris is imprisoned. Today, I joined the Zidongan Navy as an air scout, and I hope in this way to win the confidence of Sab Than, the prince who is a commander of this division of the Navy, and thus learn the whereabouts of Deja Thoris. I am glad that you are here, John Carter, for I know your loyalty to my princess, and 2 of us working together should be able to accomplish much. The plaza was now commencing to fill with people going and coming upon the daily activities of their duties. The shops were opening and the cafes filling with early morning patrons. Kantos Khan led me to one of these gorgeous eating places, where we were served entirely by mechanical apparatus. No hand touched the food, from the time it entered the building in its raw state until it emerged, hot and delicious, upon the tables before the guests. In response to the touching of tiny buttons to indicate their desires. We're very nearly that with McDonald's. After our meal, Kantos Khan took me with him to the headquarters of the Air Scout Squadron, and, introducing me to his superior, asked that I be enrolled as a member of the Corps. In accordance with custom, an examination was necessary, but Kantos Khan had told me that to have no fear on this score, as he would attend to that part of the matter. He accomplished this by taking my order for examination to the examining officer, and representing himself as John Carter. This ruse will be discovered later, he cheerfully explained, when they check up my weights, measurements, and other personal identification data, but it will be several months before this is done. And our mission should be accomplished or have failed long before that time. The next few days were spent by Kantos Khan in teaching me the intricacies of flying and of repairing the dainty little contrivances which the Martians use for this purpose. The body of the one-man aircraft is about 16 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 3 inches thick, tapering to a point at each end. The driver sits on top of this plane, upon a seat constructed over the small, noiseless radium engine which propels it. The medium of buoyancy is contained within the thin metal walls of the body, and consists of the 8th Barsoomian ray, or ray of propulsion, as it may be termed in view of its properties. This ray, like the 9th ray, is unknown on Earth, but the Martians have discovered that it is an inherent property of all light, no matter from what source it emanates. They have learned that it is the solar 8th ray which propels the light of the sun to the various planets, and that it is the individual 8th ray of each of the planets which reflects or propels the light thus obtained out into space once more. The solar 8th ray would be absorbed by the surface of Barsoom, but the Barsoomian 8th ray, which tends to propel light from Mars into space, is constantly streaming out from the planet, constituting a force of repulsion of gravity, which, when confined, is able to lift enormous weights from the surface of the ground. Okay, this is firmly where we shift into, well, I mean, we're not shifting into, it's been all along, but this is firmly in the science fantasy realm of, okay, this is science magic now. It is this ray which has enabled them to so perfect aviation that battleships far outweighing anything known upon Earth sail as gracefully and lightly through the thin air of Barsoom as a toy balloon in the heavy atmosphere of Earth. During the early years of the discovery of this ray, many strange accidents occurred before the Martians learned to measure and control the wonderful power they had found. In one instance, some 900 years before, the first great battleship to be built with the 8th ray reservoirs was stored with too great a quantity of the rays, and she had sailed up from Helium with 500 officers and men, never to return. Her power of repulsion for the planet was so great that it had carried her far into space, where she can be seen today by the aid of powerful telescopes, hurtling through the heavens 10,000 miles from Mars, a tiny satellite that will thus encircle Barsoom to the end of time. The 4th day after my arrival at Z'danga, I made my first flight, and as a result of it, I won a promotion, which included quarters in the Palace of Thankosis. Well, that was quick. As I rose above the city, I circled several times, as I had seen Kantos can do, and then, throwing my engine into top speed, I raced at terrific velocity toward the south, following one of the great waterways which enters Z'danga from that direction. I had traversed perhaps 200 miles in a little less than an hour, when I descried far below me a party of 3 green warriors racing madly toward a small figure on foot, which seemed to be trying to reach the confines of one of the walled fields. Dropping my machine rapidly toward them, and circling to the rear of the warriors, I soon saw that the object of their pursuit was a red Martian, wearing the medal of the Scout Squadron, to which I was attached. A short distance away lay his tiny flyer, surrounded by the tools with which he had evidently been occupied in repairing some damage, when surprised by the green warriors. They were now almost upon him, their flying mounts charging down on the relatively puny figure at terrific speed, while the warriors leaned low to the right, with their great metal-shod spears. Each seemed striving to be the first to impale the poor Z'dangan, and in another moment his fate would have been sealed, had it not been for my timely arrival. Driving my fleet aircraft at high speed directly behind the warriors, I soon overtook them, and without diminishing my speed, I rammed the prow of my little flyer between the shoulders of the nearest. The impact, sufficient to have torn through inches of solid steel, hurled the fellow's headless body into the air over the head of his throat, where it fell sprawling upon the moss. The mounts of the other 2 warriors were turned squealing in terror and bolted in opposite directions. Reducing my speed, I circled and came to the ground at the feet of the astonished Z'dangan. He was warm in his thanks for my timely aid, and promised that my day's work would bring the reward it merited, for it was none other than a cousin of the Jadak of Z'danga, whose life I had saved. We wasted no time in talk, as we knew that the warriors would surely return as soon as they had regained control of their mounts. Hastening to his damaged machine, we were bending every effort to finish the needed repairs, and had almost completed them, when we saw the 2 green monsters returning at top speed from opposite sides of us. When they had approached within 100 yards, their throats again became unmanageable, and absolutely refused to advance further toward the aircraft which had frightened them. The warriors finally dismounted, and, hobbling their animals, advanced toward us on foot, with drawn longsword. I advanced to meet the larger, telling the Z'dangan to do the best he could with the other, finishing my man with almost no effort, as had now, from much practice, become habitual to me. I hastened to return to my new acquaintance, whom I found indeed in desperate straits. He was wounded, and down with a huge foot of his antagonist upon his throat, and the great longsword raised to deal the final thrust. With a bound, I cleared the 50 feet intervening between us, and with outstretched point drove my sword completely through the body of the green warrior. His sword fell, harmless, to the ground, and he sank limply upon the prostrate form of the Zidongan. A cursory examination of the latter revealed no mortal injuries, and after a brief rest, he asserted that he felt fit to attempt the return voyage. He would have to pilot his own craft, however, as these frail vessels are not intended to convey but a single person. Quickly completing the repairs, we rose together into the still, cloudless Martian sky, and at great speed and without further mishap, returned to Zidonga. As we neared the city, we discovered a mighty concourse of civilians and troops assembled upon the plain before the city. The sky was black with naval vessels and private and public pleasure craft, flying long streamers of gay-colored silks and banners and flags of odd and picturesque design. My companion signaled that I slow down, and, running his machine close beside mine, suggested that we approach and watch the ceremony, which, he said, was for the purpose of conferring honors on individual officers and men for bravery and other distinguished service. He then unfurled a little ensign, which denoted that his craft bore a member of the royal family of Zidonga, and together we made our way through the maze of low-lying air vessels, until we hung directly over the Jadak of Zidonga and his staff. All were mounted upon the small domestic bull-thoats of the Red Martians, and their trappings and ornamentation bore such a quantity of gorgeously colored feathers that I could not but be struck with the startling resemblance the concourse bore to a band of the Red Indians of my own earth. One of the staff called the attention of Thancosis to the presence of my companion above them, and the ruler motioned for him to descend. As they waited for the troops to move into position facing the Jadak, the two talked earnestly together, the Jadak and his staff occasionally glancing up at me. I could not hear their conversation, and presently it ceased and all dismounted, as the last body of troops had wheeled into position before their emperor. A member of the staff advanced towards the troops, and, calling the name of a soldier, commanded him to advance. The officer then recited the nature of the heroic act which had won the approval of the Jadak, and the latter advanced and placed a metal ornament upon the left arm of the lucky man. 10 men had been so decorated, when the aide called out, "John Carter, Air Scout!" Never in my life had I been so surprised, but the habit of military discipline is strong within me, and I dropped my little machine lightly to the ground and advanced on foot, as I had seen the others do. As I halted before the officer, he addressed me in a voice audible to the entire assemblage of troops and spectators. "In recognition, John Carter," he said, "of your remarkable courage and skill in defending the person of the cousin of the Jadak Thancosis, and single-handed vanquishing 3 green warriors, it is the pleasure of our Jadak to confer on you the mark of his esteem." Thancosis then advanced toward me, and placing an ornament upon me, said, "My cousin has narrated the details of your wonderful achievement, which seems little short of miraculous. And if you can so well defend a cousin of the Jadak, how much better could you defend the person of the Jadak himself? You are therefore appointed a Padwar of the Guards, and will be quartered in my palace hereafter." I thanked him, and at his discretion joined the members of his staff. After the ceremony, I returned my machine to its quarters on the roof of the barracks of the Air Scout Squadron, and, with an orderly from the palace to guide me, I reported to the officer in charge of the palace. You may remember that Padwar was a lieutenant, so he jumped more than a few steps in a day. Not beating the Larry Stew allegations on this one. No. All right, let's continue. We've got enough time in us for at least one more chapter, maybe 2. All right, so, chapter 22. I Find Deja. Well, so far these chapter titles have been both very direct, but also pretty frequently they've been misleading. So, we'll see in what manner he finds Deja. The major domo, to whom I reported, had been given instructions to station me near the person of the Jadak, who in time of war is always in great danger of assassination, as the rule that all is fair in war seems to constitute the entire ethics of Martian conflict. This was rather before the Geneva Convention, even on Earth, so the idea of rules of war on Mars, which is being characterized as extra savage, is, understandably, laissez-faire. He therefore escorted me immediately to the apartment in which Thankosis then was. The ruler was engaged in conversation with his son, Sabthan, and several courtiers of his household, and did not perceive my entrance. The walls of the apartment were completely hung with splendid tapestries, which hid any windows or doors which may have pierced them. The room was lighted by imprisoned rays of sunshine, held between the ceiling proper and what appeared to be a ground glass false ceiling a few inches below. My guide drew aside one of the tapestries, disclosing a passage which circled the room, between the hangings and the walls of the chamber. Within this passage I was to remain, he said, so long as Thankosis was in the apartment. When he left, I was to follow. My only duty was to guard the ruler and to keep out of sight as much as possible. I would be relieved after a period of 4 hours. The major domo then left me. The tapestries were of a strange weaving, which gave the appearance of heavy solidity from one side, but from my hiding place I could perceive all that took place within the room, as readily as though there had been no curtain intervening. Scarcely had I gained my post, than the tapestry at the opposite end of the chamber separated, and 4 soldiers of the guard entered, surrounding a female figure. As they approached Thankosis, the soldiers fell to either side, and there, standing before the Jadak, and not 10 feet from me, her beautiful face radiant with smiles, was Deja Thoris. Sabthan, Prince of Zidonga, advanced to meet her, and, hand in hand, they approached, close to the Jadak. Thankosis looked up in surprise, and, rising, saluted her. "What strange freak do I owe this visit from the Princess of Helium, who, not 2 days ago, with rare consideration for my pride, assured me that she would prefer Talhassus, the green Thark, to my son?" Deja Thoris only smiled the more, with the roguish dimples playing at the corners of her mouth, she made answer. "From the beginning of time, upon Barsoom, it has been the prerogative of a woman to change her mind, as she listed, and to dissemble in matters concerning her heart. That you will forgive, Thankosis, as has your son. 2 days ago I was not sure of his love for me, but now I am, and I have come to beg of you to forget my rash words, and to accept the assurance of the Princess of Helium that, when the time comes, she will wed Sabthan, Prince of Zidonga." "I am glad that you have so decided," replied Thankosis. "It is far from my desire to push war further upon the people of Helium, and your promise shall be recorded, and a proclamation to my people issued forthwith." "It were better, Thankosis," interrupted Deja Thoris, "that the proclamation wait the ending of this war. It would look strange indeed to my people and to yours, were the Princess of Helium to give herself to her country's enemy in the midst of hostilities." "Cannot the war be ended at once?" spoke Sabthan. "It requires but the word of Thankosis to bring peace. Say it, my father. Say the word that you will hasten my happiness, and end this unpopular strife." "We shall see," replied Thankosis, "how the people of Helium take to peace. I shall at least offer it to them." Deja Thoris, after a few words, turned and left the apartment, still followed by her guards. Thus was the edifice of my brief dream of happiness dashed, broken to the ground of reality. The woman for whom I had offered my life, and from whose lips I had so recently heard a declaration of love for me, had lightly forgotten my very existence, and smilingly given herself to the son of her people's most hated enemy. Although I had heard it with my own ears, I could not believe it. I must search out her apartments and force her to repeat the cruel truth to me alone before I would be convinced. And so I deserted my post and hastened through the passage behind the tapestries toward the door by which she had left the chamber. Slipping quietly through this opening, I discovered a maze of winding corridors, branching and turning in every direction. Running rapidly down first one and then another of them, I soon became hopelessly lost, and was standing panting against a side wall when I heard voices near me. Apparently, they were coming from the opposite side of the partition against which I had leaned, and presently I made out the tones of Dejah Thoris. I could not hear the words, but I knew that I could not possibly be mistaken in the voice. Moving on a few steps, I discovered another passageway, at the end of which lay a door. Walking boldly forward, I pushed into the room only to find myself in a small antechamber, in which were the 4 guards who had accompanied her. One of them instantly arose and accosted me, asking the nature of my business. "I am from Thancosis," I replied, "and wish to speak privately with Dejah Thoris, Princess of Helium." "And your order?" asked the fellow. I did not know what he meant, but replied that I was a member of the guard, and without waiting for a reply from them, I strode toward the opposite door of the antechamber, behind which I could hear Dejah Thoris conversing. But my entrance was not to be so easily accomplished. The guardsman stepped before me, saying, "No one comes from Thancosis without carrying an order or the password. You must give me one or the other before you may pass." "The only order I require, my friend, to enter where I will, hangs at my side," I answered, tapping my longsword. "Will you let me pass in peace, or no?" For reply, he whipped out his own sword, calling to the others to join him, and thus the 4 stood, with drawn weapons barring my further progress. "You are not here by the order of Thancosis," cried the one who had first addressed me. "And not only shall you not enter the apartments of the Princess of Helium, but you shall go back to Thancosis under guard. To explain this unwarranted temerity, throw down your sword. You cannot hope to overcome 4 of us," he added with a grim smile. My reply was a quick thrust, which left me but 3 antagonists. And I can assure you that they were worthy of my mettle. They had backed me against the wall in no time, fighting for my life. Slowly, I worked my way to a corner of the room, where I could force them to come at me only one at a time. And thus we fought upward of 20 minutes, the clanging of steel on steel producing a veritable bedlam in the little room. The noise had brought Dejah Thoris to the door of her apartment, and there she stood, throughout the conflict with Sola at her back, peering over her shoulder. Her face was set and emotionless, and I knew that she did not recognize me, nor did Sola. Finally, a lucky cut brought down a second guardsman, and then, with only 2 opposing me, I changed my tactics and rushed them down after the fashion of my fighting that had won me many a victory. The third fell within 10 seconds after the second, and the last lay dead upon the bloody floor a few moments later. They were brave men, and noble fighters, and it grieved me that I had been forced to kill them. But I would have willingly depopulated all of Barsoom, could I have reached the side of my Dejah Thoris in no other way. Damn, dude. I know you love this lady, your special red woman, but, bro, you can't just say, "I would genocide a planet for her." No, 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 no. Sheathing my bloody blade, I advanced toward my Martian princess, who still stood mutely gazing at me without sign of recognition. "Who are you, Zidongan? She whispered. Another enemy to harass me in my misery? I am a friend, I answered. A once cherished friend. No friend of Helium's princess wears that metal, she replied, and yet the voice. I've heard it before. It cannot be. No, for he is dead. It is, though, my princess, none other than John Carter, I said. Do you not recognize, even through paint and strange metal, the heart of your chieftain? As I came close to her, she swayed toward me with outstretched hands. But as I reached to take her in my arms, she drew back with a shudder and a little moan of misery. Too late, she grieved. Oh, my chieftain that was, and whom I thought dead, had you but returned 1 little hour before. But now it is too late. Too late. What do you mean, Dejathoris? I cried. That you would not have promised yourself to the Zidongan prince had you known that I lived? Think you, John Carter, that I would give my heart to you yesterday and today to another? I thought that it lay buried with your ashes in the pits of Warhoon. And so today, I have promised my body to another, to save my people from the curse of a victorious Zidongan army. But I am not dead, my princess. I have come to claim you, and all Zidonga cannot prevent it. It is too late, John Carter. My promise is given, and on Barsoom that is final. The ceremonies which follow later are but meaningless formalities. They make the fact of a marriage no more certain than does the funeral cortege of a Janak again place the seal of death upon him. I am as good as married, John Carter. No longer may you call me your princess. No longer are you my chieftain. I know but little of your customs here upon Barsoom, Dejathoris, but I do know that I love you. And if you meant the last words you spoke to me that day as the hordes of Warhoon were charging down upon us, no other man shall ever claim you as his bride. You meant them then, my princess, and you mean them still. Say that it is true. I meant them, John Carter, she whispered. I cannot repeat them now, for I have given myself to another. Oh, if you had only known our ways, my friend, she continued, half to herself, the promise would have been yours long months ago, and you could have claimed me before all others. It might have meant the fall of Helium, but I would have given my empire, my Tharkian chief. Then, aloud, she said, Do you remember the night when you offended me? You called me your princess, without having asked my hand of me, and then you boasted that you had fought for me. You did not know, and I should not have been offended. I see that now. There was no one to tell you what I could not. That upon Barsoom there are two kinds of women in the cities of the Red Men. The one they fight for, that they may ask them of in marriage. The other kind they also fight for, but never ask their hands. When a man has won a woman, he may address her as his princess, or in any of the several terms which signify possession. You had fought for me, but had never asked me in marriage, and so when you called me your princess, you see, she faltered. I was hurt, but even then, John Carter, I did not repulse you, as I should have done, until you made it doubly worse by taunting me with having won me through combat. I do not need to ask your forgiveness now, Dejathoris, I cried. You must know that my fault was of ignorance of your Barsoomian customs. What I failed to do, through implicit belief that my petition would be presumptuous and unwelcome, I do now, Dejathoris. I ask you to be my wife, and by all the Virginian fighting blood that flows in my veins, you shall be. No, John Carter. It is useless, she cried hopelessly. I may never be yours while Sabthan lives. You have sealed his death warrant, my princess. Sabthan dies. Bro is, ready for blood. Not that either, she hastened to explain. I may not wed the man who slays my husband. Even in self-defense, it is custom. We are ruled by custom upon Barsoom. It is useless, my friend. You must bear the sorrow with me. That, at least, we may share in common. That, and the memory of the brief days among the Tharks. You must go now, nor ever see me again. Goodbye, my chieftain that was. Disheartened and dejected, I withdrew from the room, but I was not entirely discouraged. Nor would I admit that Deja Thoris was lost to me until the ceremony had actually been performed. As I wandered along the corridors, I was as absolutely lost in the mazes of winding passageways as I had been before I discovered Deja Thoris's apartments. I knew that my only hope lay in escape from the city of Zodonga, for the matter of the 4 dead guardsmen would have to be explained, and as I could never reach my original post without a guide, suspicion would surely rest on me so soon as I was discovered wandering aimlessly through the palace. Presently, I came upon a spiral runway leading to a lower floor, and this I followed downward for several stories, until I reached the doorway of a large apartment, in which were a number of guardsmen. The walls of this room were hung with transparent tapestries, behind which I secreted myself, without being apprehended. The conversation of the guardsmen was general, and awakened no interest in me until an officer entered the room and ordered 4 of the men to relieve the detail who were guarding the Princess of Helium. Now I knew my troubles would commence in earnest, and indeed they were upon me all too soon, for it seemed that the squad had scarcely left the guard room before one of their number burst in again breathlessly, crying that they had found their 4 comrades butchered in the antechamber. In a moment, the entire palace was alive with people. Guardsmen, officers, courtiers, servants, and slaves ran helter-skelter through the corridors and apartments, carrying messages and orders and searching for signs of the assassin. This was my opportunity, and slim as it appeared, I grasped it. For as a number of soldiers came hurrying past my hiding place, I fell in behind them, and followed through the mazes of the palace until, in passing through a great hall, I saw the blessed light of day, coming in through a series of larger windows. Here I left my guides, and slipping to the nearest window, sought for an avenue of escape. The windows opened upon a great balcony, which overlooked one of the broad avenues of Zodonga. The ground was about 30 feet below, and at a light distance from the building was a wall fully 20 feet high, constructed of a polished glass about a foot in thickness. To a red Martian, to escape by this path would have appeared impossible, but to me, with my earthly strength and agility, it seemed already accomplished. My only fear was in being detected before darkness fell, for I could not make the leap in broad daylight, while the court below and the avenue beyond were crowded with Zodongans. Accordingly, I searched for a hiding place, and finally found one by accident, inside a huge hanging ornament which swung from the ceiling of the hall, and about 10 feet from the floor. Into the capacious, bowl-like vase I sprang with ease, and scarcely had I settled down within it than I heard a number of people enter the apartment. The group stopped beneath my hiding place, and I could plainly overhear their every word. "It is the work of the Heliumites," said one of them. "Yes, Ojadak, but how had they access to the palace? I could believe that, even with the diligent care of your guardsmen, a single enemy might reach the inner chambers, but how a force of 6 or 8 fighting men could have done so unobserved is beyond me. We shall soon know, however, for here comes the royal psychologist." Another man now joined the group, and after making his formal greetings to his ruler, said, "Oh, my teacher Dak, it is a strange tale I read in the dead minds of your faithful guardsmen. They were felled not by a number of fighting men, but by a single opponent." He paused to let the full weight of this announcement impress his hearers, and that his statement was scarcely credited was evidenced by the impatient exclamation of incredulity which escaped the lips of Thancosis. "What manner of weird tale are you bringing me, Notan?" he cried. Yeah, this is like 3 books in one so far, and not terribly long either. Just like it shifts diametrically. "It is the truth, my Jadak," replied the psychologist. "In fact, the impressions were strongly marked on the brain of each of the 4 guardsmen. Their antagonist was a very tall man, wearing the medal of one of your own guardsmen, and his fighting ability was little short of marvelous. For he fought fair against the entire 4 and vanquished them by his surpassing skill and superhuman strength and endurance. Though he wore the medal of Zdonga, my Jadak, such a man was never before in this or any other country upon Barsoom. The mind of the Princess of Helium, whom I have examined and questioned, was a blank to me. She has perfect control, and I could not read one iota of it. She said that she witnessed a portion of the encounter, and that when she looked, there was but one man engaged with the guardsman, a man whom she did not recognize as ever having seen." "Where is my erstwhile savior?" spoke another of the party, and I recognized the voice of the cousin of Thancosis, whom I had rescued from the Green Warriors. "By the medal of my first ancestor," he went on, "but the description fits him to perfection, especially as to his fighting ability." "Where is this man?" cried Thancosis. "Have him brought to me at once. What know you of him, cousin? It seems strange to me, now that I think upon it, that there should have been such a fighting man in Zodonga, whose name, even, we were ignorant before today. And his name, too, John Carter. Who ever heard of such a name upon Barsoom?" Word was soon brought that I was nowhere to be found, either in the palace or at my former quarters in the barracks of the Air Scout Squadron. Cantos Can they had found and questioned, but he knew nothing of my whereabouts, and as to my past, he had told them he knew as little, since he had but recently met me during our captivity among the Warhoons. "Keep your eyes on this one. This other one," commanded Thancosis. "He is also a stranger, and likely as not they both hail from Helium. And where one is, we shall sooner or later find the other. Quadruple the air patrol, and let every man who leaves the city by air or ground be subjected to the closest scrutiny." Another messenger now entered, with word that I was still within the palace walls. "The likeness of every person who has entered or left the palace grounds today has been carefully examined," concluded the fellow, "and no one approaches the likeness of this new Padwar of the Guards, other than that which was recorded of him at the time he entered." "Then we will have him shortly," commented Thancosis contentedly. "And, in the meanwhile, we will repair to the apartments of the Princess of Helium and question her in regard to the affair. She may know more now than she cared to divulge to you, Notan." They left the hall, and as darkness had fallen without, I slipped lightly from my hiding place and hastened to the balcony. Few were in sight, and choosing a moment when none seemed near, I sprang quickly to the top of the glass wall, and from there to the avenue beyond the palace grounds. All right, that brings us to the end of chapter 22, and we have before us about 20% of the book left. We're making very solid progress, and if I guess it right, we have a very real chance of finishing on Sunday night. So we have a conclusion ahead of us, and likely a new escape. He'll probably find some way to condemn the poor prince of the new band of red men to unfortunate and early end. John Carter has become quite a lot more willing to shed blood for his ends. So, yeah, it is very likely we'll be finishing both of our books this weekend. we do have plans already for our next unarchived readings, which, if you recall, I think we'll be reading the first of the Hyperion Cantos in respect to the recently departed author of said work. And it'll be nice to see some more sci-fi-ish sci-fi, rather than the science fantasy that we've been reading here. As for what our next classic will be, that's a very, very good question. I haven't the slightest idea, which is actually our kind of usual state. When we finish one book, I am usually at a tremendous loss as to what we're going to read next. Yeah, that's just how it works. we are spoiled for choice around here, but it's fun. It's a good problem to have. All right, let's get out of the reading nook for now. That is the library there. Yeah, we're starting to run dry on our filler books too. We've got a few Lovecraft books that we still need to, a few Lovecraft stories to be able to get through, but not that many, honestly. And those are our go-to fillers. But there are other sorts of things that we can do. It might be time to revisit Le Mort d'Arthur. That's a little dry, though, if I'm being entirely honest. There's always more Mark Twain to read. You got lots of options. But yeah, if you've got anything that you'd like to read, anyone, not necessarily just Akamos. Oh yeah, we do have Wonderland to return to as well. If you got anything that you would like to read, see read, force me to suffer through, feel free to drop suggestions, whether it be over on Bluesky, a comment on YouTube, whether it be a post or a comment on one of our videos, or any other of the myriad ways to reach me. Yeah, not just you, but often. Zian gave us a very early suggestion back when we read The Mysterious Island. So, we do read things from other people from time to time. Alright, so that'll be all we have for tonight. Let's go ahead and see. Friday evenings are usually a good time to raid into people, so let's see if anyone is busy. Let's see. Let's see if there's anything to... anybody new to explore that is reading now. Let's see. Not a ton of readers, which is kind of just how we roll around here. There's some writers, but I'd rather find somebody that's reading at this point. Well, let's see. Oh, I do think we've got... Let's see. Looks like Ultra Blue is reading again tonight, so we can pop into her. Looks like she's starting a new... Oh, Jane Eyre. That's a good one. I think somebody else read that not too long ago. I think Vexing Cat just read that a few months ago. So, all sorts of good books to go around. So yeah, let's go ahead and raid over to Ultra Blue and say hi, and we will... Yeah, Jane Eyre is fantastic. And so, I am always happy to see people reading good books. And hey, welcome. I haven't seen you chat before, so welcome aboard. I hope you enjoyed your time. Hopefully you didn't just join us, because we are just finishing up for the evening. So, alright, let's go ahead and prep our raid, and we will go say hi to Ultra Blue tonight. I thank everyone for joining us. If you are on the YouTube side, we appreciate follows and we appreciate likes on the stream. If you are on the Twitch side, follows are always welcome. We are just getting started in our channel over here and doing our best to gradually grow our little community. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get along now. Say hi to Ultra Blue for us, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you very much, and good night.
Oh yeah, I remember. How's that going? It's like, for example, let's say a heterogeneous thing, a person and a temperament, the capacity and prosperity, so you use this thing. If you're both certain features are in your plus noxious thing. So, no. Oh, I